The idea behind academic research is that you ask a question that no one else has asked before. In part, that's why you start this process by reading the existing academic research on your topic, so that you can see what questions have been asked already and identify what holes still remain in our knowledge of your topic. Once you've decided on what question to ask, you then have to use the correct research method to answer that question. If you don't use a method that's well suited to answering your question, your research findings won't be valid. So, how do you do this? This lesson is going to talk about generating possible research questions based on your topic or area of interest. You'll see that it's possible to ask many different research questions from a single topic. Which one you pick will ultimately be driven by your own interests and by what's already been addressed in the existing research on your topic. I'm also going to talk about which sorts of research methods would be used to answer different types of research questions. The fit between the research question and the method you use is incredibly important. It's what makes the research valid, for starters. But in practical terms, having a research method that fits your question is going to be the best way to make sure that this research process doesn't drive you nuts. It's also worth mentioning at this point that many people come into this project knowing what type of research they want to do, whether that's survey research, content analysis, etc. If you know what type of method you want to do, it's important that you write a research question that particular method is suited to answer. This concept is best shown by example. So rather than defining things abstractly, I'm going to walk you through a process of generating possible research questions based on a broad area of interest that I personally have. Because I'm interested in corporate social responsibility, and because I'm also a person who likes to go on cruises, I'm really interested in how cruise lines communicate their efforts to be environmentally responsible, which is a key aspect of corporate social responsibility. I'm interested particularly in looking at one company, the Royal Caribbean Group, that owns a few different cruise lines, including the main one, Royal Caribbean. In the future, I could choose to do similar research with other companies, or I could include multiple companies if I wanted to compare and contrast. So let's start with this possible research question. Because my research in corporate social responsibility comes from my interest in strategic communications, one thing I'm interested in is exactly how the company communicates its environmental sustainability efforts to a number of different publics. So I could ask a question like this one to focus on the company and what the company is doing in terms of strategic communication. In order to answer this question, I would need to gather all of the different communication messages that the company has produced on this topic. And then I would have to have a systematic way to analyze that communication produced by the company on this particular topic. This is what's known as a content analysis. Content analysis is a systematic way to analyze a group of documents in order to answer a research question. Now keep in mind that the definition of the word document can be quite broad. I once had a student in this class who did a content analysis, and her documents were protests by the group ACT UP in the 1980s. Documents can be written items like press releases, annual reports, etc., but they can also be films, TikToks, propaganda ads, etc. You can analyze these documents in different ways, and if you decide to use this method, we'll talk about the difference between qualitative and quantitative content analysis and when those methods are most appropriate. But for now, what you need to know about this method is that it's the one you choose if you want to answer a research question that's based on a set of documents, whatever kind those documents might be. Okay, here's another possible research question. One important rule of academic research is that if you want to answer a question about people, you're probably going to have to actually ask people. There's just not really a way of getting around it. If you're not interested in doing research that involves people, then you're going to want to think of a question that could be answered with content analysis, with documents only. You can't really answer a research question about people without actually involving people in the research. Now, if you have a question like this one, and you want to understand how people feel about or perceive something by learning about it from their words, you're going to do what's called qualitative research. The data you collect in this type of research, which is conducted in one-on-one interviews or focus groups, is going to be words, ideas, and phrases. It's not going to be the typical numbers in a spreadsheet that you're used to thinking of when you hear the word data. If you choose to do interviews or focus groups for your research, your data set is going to be the transcripts of the questions you ask and the answers that your research participants give. In qualitative research, although you're not going to be crunching numbers, you're still going to be taking a systematic approach to analyzing that data. It just looks different than what you might be used to. Here we have a third possible research question. This research question asks us to give an answer that applies to all people. It's a pretty simple yes or no question with maybe some shades of gray in there that you can understand better with research. But there's just no way that we can ask all people everywhere to answer this question. We need to be able to ask a smaller group of people and then generalize to a larger population. Anytime you want to generalize to a larger population by asking a smaller group of people to answer a question, you're going to need to do a survey. Some of you have probably taken classes where you talk about survey research, and this method is actually pretty complicated if you want to do it right and have your results be statistically significant. There are certain ways you have to choose your sample, for instance, to make sure that the results from the sample can be generalized to the larger population. We're not going to talk about that much here because, well, we don't have the time or the resources to do truly statistically sound research in this barely 3-month time period. What's important for you to know is that every time you want to answer a question about a larger population by generalizing from a smaller one, you have to use quantitative research, a survey. This will look more like the data and analysis you're used to thinking about when someone says research. But it's important to note that this is not the only way to do research, not by a long shot. Now, this is a very practical question to ask. If you're a company and you're considering becoming more environmentally sustainable, you would probably want to know whether the work that it would take to do that would benefit your company with increased product sales. That's kind of the way that companies work. But there's sort of a red flag in this question, at least for the purposes of this paper you're writing for Great Ideas. You see, in any research question where you're trying to prove cause and effect, you're going to have to use an experimental research method. You might recognize this kind of research from the science classes you took in middle or high school. In an experiment, you have some sort of situation where you manipulate an independent variable and measure to see if there's a change in a dependent variable. There's actually a lot of communication research that's structured this way because, as I mentioned, this is the only real method to use if you want to prove cause and effect. But the thing is, it takes time and sometimes resources. And those aren't really things you have access to in this course. So we're going to try to avoid asking questions that are about cause and effect like this one. Okay, final question. This is a good one. As someone who studies corporate social responsibility, I always have to ask about whether a company that has a negative impact should even be allowed to operate. But here's the problem. There's really no research method that you can use to answer a question like this one in the amount of time that you have for the research paper in this class. This question is complicated and it has a lot of factors that you need to consider. This is the kind of question someone might ask in a dissertation. So for right now, we're going to refer to these as big questions and decide that they are too big to tackle within the time and resources that you have available in this class. If at some point I tell you that your research question is too much of a big question, don't worry. We can always talk about changes you can make to your research question that will make it work for this class and with one of the research methods that we've discussed.